Last week, we saw the 70th and final frame bent into place on Arabella's hull. This week, Steve and Aaron will get those fastened into place, and then they'll get to work on building the deck structure. In the background, Joe is working on a new base for the planer setup, but we'll show that next week. Thanks to all of you for watching, and an extra thanks for the community supporting us on Patreon. And don't forget to subscribe to follow new videos each week.
The mission for the next day, 2 days, 3 days, I honestly have no concept of how long this is going to take. We're going to put in the last of the bent frames here. So over the last day and a half, Aaron and I oiled and sanded and painted and got them all ready to go, so they're all cleaned up. The tops up there that aren't oiled, that'll all get cut off. They're still long for now. We did the letting in for the bronze strapping. So the next step is to go in and put them in their homes, make sure everything looks good. Put on some dolphinite and start putting in the rivets and the bolts and whatever assorted fasteners they need, which is going to be a lot of fasteners. We've got quite a few planks on the boat, so it's going to take Aaron and I a little while to go through and do all of these. And we were just saying we have no idea if we'll finish both sides today, if we'll do half of the boat today, if we'll do a quarter of the boat today. I don't really know. The riveting takes a while, but it'd be really awesome to have Arabella fully framed out, which we're only a day or two or three, we'll see, away from that. When we've been putting these frames in, what we found works pretty well is we've got the little pockets that we had made when we bent them in. And we get them set in the pocket, we clamp it down in place, and if there's a bronze strap, we want to make sure we clamp it down really well, exactly where it needs to be, and make sure that when I let in for the bronze straps that I took enough material out and got all the angles correct. So thankfully we do that before we dolphinite. So if it doesn't seem quite right, we can take it out, make a minor tweak, try it again, dolphinite it, and put it in place. This one, there's no bronze straps, so we just put it in place close enough where we could push it down and make some pencil marks so we knew where to put the dolphinite. And then these straps have been really handy, making sure that we have it all the way down against the center line structure. And as we clamp them in, what seems to have happened is sometimes they want to kind of climb up and out a little bit, and this strap definitely stops that. So we just put the strap on, crank it down a little bit. If it doesn't want to go, a couple thumps with the sledgehammer on the top, and so far they've been setting right down. Now that this is locked in, we can take this strap off, and the next thing we're going to do is put in a couple temporary steel bolts to suck this down to the planking, to close up the gaps in the split frame, and then once that's really nice and tight, we'll go through and put in the rivets. I picked just a couple spots where it's out the farthest and drill through and use the air hose and this little pick and kind of clean out the slot and clean up behind, because if the timbers aren't really tight against each other, when you drill, it'll get filled up in there with you know, wood filings from drilling, little wood shavings. So they get caught in the dolphinite, and the pick is perfect. Just kind of go in there and scoop them out and blow them out with the air hose. And then we can put in a steel bolt and we'll suck this down nice and tight and see how many. We've been putting somewhere between 1 and 4, depending on where the planks are. And that pulls it all really nice and tight, and we can go through, put all the rivets in, and then it won't move, and we can pop those steel bolts out. So having the steel bolts for the bilge bands is actually proving kind of handy. So when we put the steels in, because the frame is sitting kind of cocked a little bit to the plank and we suck it all down, the holes don't like perfectly line up. So pulling them out has been a little bit of a struggle. All right, so that was a wrap. Arabella is fully framed. Woohoo! So all 70 of her frames are bent in or cut in, so there's 35 frames per side, and they are all in, bedded, painted, fastened, and done. I'm going to dive into the deck structure, which I'm really looking forward to. And Casey will be by next week, so he's going to come give me a hand starting that. And Aaron's going to head along and go back to making some money, because he hasn't done that in a while. So yeah, this feels really, really good to have her fully framed. That's a big, big box to tick off. So onto the deck. So all of the frames are in Arabella and the molds are out. So the next thing to work on is the deck structure. And the first thing to go in is the clamp. And before we can put the clamp in, we need to figure out exactly where the clamp is going to land in the frames, because we need to subtract from the shear, which is up here, the thickness of the deck, the thickness of our deck beams, the thickness of our shelf, and that'll give us the location of the clamp. The other thing we need to figure out is what crown or camber the deck beams are going to have, because they all have an arch to them. And in true Atkin fashion, he doesn't give us a number. We can scale them off the plans, and it's a rough idea. But from my research, a boat like this should have somewhere in the ballpark of 3/8 to 1 foot, or a 1/2 inch to 1 foot. And that would be the rise over the run, bringing us back to middle school math here. So to figure out this angle, we need to figure out roughly what our deck beams are going to look like. So we got to figure out the width of the hull at different frame spacings, and then we can play with the deck camber and figure out somewhere between 3/8 to a 1/2 inch per foot and find a crown that looks good, make a few of those patterns, put them into the hull, and that'll let us pick up the angle of the top of the clamp. Because the shelf is going to be the same thickness, so this angle will be the same when the deck beam's here as it will be for the clamp. And they'll be at least close enough. So that's what we got to go figure out now. And once we find this spot and we find this angle, we know what the camber is, we can go start making the clamp and the shelf and the deck beams. And Bud McIntosh here, so this is How to Build a Wooden Boat by Dave Bud McIntosh. And here he shows it really well. So his boat isn't a double ender, so it's a little different, but aft, you can see that the deck beams don't meet the top of the clamp. Midship, they're a lot closer to meeting the top of the clamp. And up forward, they would actually be buried down into the clamp. And that's because the angle of the frame to the deck beam continually changes down the hull. So that is what we are trying to figure out, so that when we make the clamp, we can put the appropriate angle at the top. So the shelf just sits right on it, and the deck beam sits right on the shelf, and the shelf will come out of the frames and underneath the deck beam at the correct angle. So hope you followed that. If not, I'm sure you will as we get a little farther down the road. All right, so I'm going through the boat and I am marking the height, so where the top of the clamp is going to land, and I'm measuring the width at the shear at the top of the deck height. So that's for helping to figure out what the camber is going to be, and just marking where the top of the clamp is going to land, so that when the time comes, it's already marked and ready. So I have my square here set to 5.5 inches, which is the deck minus the deck beams minus the thickness of the shelf. And what I'm going to do is put the corner of it right up underneath the shear here, and then I'm going to use the level bubble and level it and draw a line across the frame. I don't want to just measure down along the frame, because I'm going to be measuring at that angle, and what we want is a level line across the boat. So I'll put that right there. Go until the bubble is in its home. Let's make a mark. So that will be top of the clamp. All right. And then I need the width so that I can make up a deck beam. So we're gonna throw that at the shear. That'll hold it for me. And I'll run over to the other side and get that marked and pull my width. All right, so 10'2". So now I have it at frame D, frame H, and frame L. So we went through and we assigned all of the frames a letter, starting in the stem with the sawn frames. So the sawns are A, B, C, D, and then E, F, G all the way down. So right now we've got D and H and L. I'm gonna hit S, Z, and double F. And that will give me, what, 2, 4, 6 deck beams that we can put down the length of the boat. That'll let me see what that camber looks like, and it'll let us put a batten from stem to stern on top of those and see what that looks like, see if that's a nice fair line. And then once kind of have all that figured out and I'm happy with it, then we will launch into making the clamp. All right, so on to S. 11'2". Alright, 10'3". So now I have all of the pertinent information. Let's go do some math and see if we can lay out some deck beam, camber, crown, whatever you want to call it. I've done a lot of reading about deck camber and how to figure it out and how to get a smooth, fair arc and keep a fair deck. And there's a bunch of mathematical ways, but I am going to try this way, which is kind of a mechanical way. So you do a straight line, you mark your center, and you go up the height that you want your crown, and you take these battens here, and the corner of them gets fixed. And then you put a pencil or some other marker in there and you just slide it from one side to the other. You have to do this for pretty much every deck beam, and it should give a really nice smooth arc. So that is what I'm going to try to do. And I've seen this in other places, but these images are from good old Wooden Boat magazine. It's the March, April of 2002. So always good to have a few wooden boats kicking around as a reference. Okay, here is our pattern piece. So ignore this lower line. I realized that the baseline needed to be higher so that I could get some width underneath for the thickness of the deck beams so that I could get an accurate measurement. So I had to just bump the line up a little bit. But we have the center here, and up here at the very tip is the height that we have for the camber. And then measured out to either end, we have a nail. And then we have this big batten here that's laid out. And that goes onto the template here so that the middle of the batten lines up with the middle. And then it runs down in a straight line until it hits the nail on one end, and a straight line until it hits the nail at the other end. And then when that's situated, touching all three nails, we fasten the joint here, and at the apex I drilled a hole where we are going to stick a pencil. And then you take out the nail at the peak here in the middle that helped us define that arc, and then you just slide it back and forth and it should give us a nice smooth curve. At least that's what all the books tell me. So this is going to be hard to do alone. So Grandpa's here, he's going to give me a hand. And we've got a bunch marked out there, so we'll see if we can get these deck beams marked out.
Just weigh about a foot and then go back?
Well, I can pick it up and kind of just start to ride it on. There you go. So I ended up going with the higher side, so the 1/2 inch per foot of rise over run. And part of the reason for that is I was reading through Larry Parday's book, and that's what he did with his boat Seraphin. And or Taliesin, whichever of those two. And he said that if you were working with tough timber like oak or locust that was stringy and you had curved stock, that he thought having that little extra camber, it helps the boat shed the water better, and he thinks it looks nicer. So why not? Let's go for it. So Grandpa came down, I pulled all the measurements earlier, got things marked out, and then I had my grandpa come down and he helped me, and we slid that rig across and we made our arcs. And then I just set dividers to 2.5, which is the width of the deck beams. And I just swung some arcs, connected them with a batten. And now we've got the shape of a bunch of deck beams. So I'm gonna clean up the tools here and grab the skill saw and go through and cut these out. I should be able to follow the curve with the skill saw. If I can't, we'll have to do it with the bandsaw. And we'll see what they look like in the boat. First deck beam pattern. Now there's 35 pairs of frames in Arabella, and every one of them is going to get a deck beam, but we are not going to make a pattern for every single deck beam. So they're all just a little bit different, but they are so close to the same that we can use the same pattern for 3, maybe even 6 deck beams, and then switch to another pattern. No matter what we do, there's going to have to be some fairing that's going to be done at the very end once they're all installed. So instead of making ourselves crazy, making 37 different patterns, what we'll do is just make them ever so tiny bit taller than they really need to be, and we'll put them all into the boat, and we'll use one pattern for multiple ones and then switch to another pattern, and when we fair them out, we'll just smooth all that out, make it all disappear, and you know, spend a little more time fairing and a whole heck of a lot less time in material pattern making.
Next week, we'll build a new, sturdier home for the thicknesser. And we'll make up Arabella's clamp as we continue with the deck structure.